On the morning of October 14, 2003, Lauren Mitchell, age 28, left her residence at 7:31 a.m., driving a gray 2001 Honda Accord registered in her name. Her stated purpose, as reconstructed by investigators based on her routine and confirmed by Daycare logs, was to drop off her daughter, Emily Mitchell, age 3, at the Little Steps Early Learning Center in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The Daycare sign-in sheet confirms Lauren's presence at 7:48 a.m., and a staff member later confirmed that Lauren appeared calm and unhurried. This would constitute the last known verified sighting of Lauren Mitchell alive. At 12:10 p.m., Michael Mitchell, her husband of 6 years, made the first of multiple unsuccessful attempts to contact Lauren by phone. According to his official statement, he initially assumed she was running errands or attending a last-minute appointment. At 2:46 p.m., he called the daycare and learned that Lauren had not returned to pick up Emily. At 6:03 p.m., Michael filed a missing person report with the Cedar Falls Police Department. Law enforcement officers initiated standard procedure. A BOLO, be on the lookout, alert was issued for Lauren Mitchell and her vehicle. At 8:40 p.m., the gray Honda Accord was located abandoned in the parking lot of the Evergreen Mall Plaza, 3.1 miles from the daycare center. The vehicle was locked. Lauren's purse, keys, and cell phone were not recovered from the scene. There were no visible signs of forced entry, damage, or struggle. Forensic technicians dusted the exterior and interior for fingerprints. No foreign prints were identified. The interior was clean, and the fuel tank was 3/4 full. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses yielded no usable imagery due to poor camera angles and low resolution. Analysis of Lauren's financial accounts revealed no activity after a fuel purchase made the previous evening at 6:17 p.m. No ATM withdrawals or credit card transactions occurred on the day of her disappearance. Her last cell tower ping was recorded at 7:52 a.m., consistent with the daycare location. The phone was either turned off or disabled immediately afterward. A subpoena for her mobile provider records confirmed no outbound or inbound communication following that timestamp. Search efforts began the following morning, October 15th, involving local police, state troopers, and civilian volunteers. K-9 units traced Lauren's scent to the mall parking lot but were unable to continue beyond the edge of the property. Aerial reconnaissance and thermal imaging conducted on October 16th provided no relevant findings. Divers conducted precautionary checks of the nearby river basin. No evidence was recovered. Michael Mitchell was interviewed on October 15th and again on October 17th. He submitted to a voluntary polygraph test, which was reported as inconclusive. No evidence of domestic violence or marital discord was documented in police or medical records. Lauren Mitchell had no known mental health issues or history of voluntary disappearances. Her employer, Jensen Dental Associates, confirmed she had not requested time off and was expected at work the day of her disappearance. On November 3, 2003, the investigation was reclassified from missing person to suspicious disappearance. A formal case file was submitted to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. By February 2004, with no leads, no suspects, and no physical evidence beyond the recovered vehicle, the case was entered into the cold case database. In March 2005, Lauren Mitchell was declared legally missing under Iowa Code Section 144.94. Michael Mitchell was granted full legal custody of Emily Mitchell through District Court Order #CF04-12391. No life insurance claims were filed by the husband, and no benefit disbursement was initiated by her employer. The disappearance remained open but inactive for the next 20 years. The file was reviewed biennially, with no new developments until June 2023. On June 2, 2023, at approximately 10:18 a.m., 23-year-old Emily Mitchell completed her final exam at Black Hawk Community College in Waterloo, Iowa. At 10:42 a.m., she sent a text message to her father, Michael Mitchell, stating her intention to stop by the home of her maternal grandmother and step-grandfather, Eleanor and Frank Hayes, before returning to the residence they shared in Cedar Falls. That text would be the last confirmed communication from Emily Mitchell. Security footage retrieved from a Ring camera located on Maplewood Avenue, 1 block from the Hayes residence, recorded Emily walking northbound at 11:27 a.m. toward the direction of their home on Larkspur Drive. She appeared alone, wearing a blue zip-up hoodie and carrying a canvas tote bag later identified by her father. No return footage exists showing Emily leaving the area. According to metadata analysis, her mobile phone disconnected from the network at 11:34 a.m., last pinging off a tower within a 400-meter radius of the Hayes property. Subsequent forensic examination would confirm no further activity, calls, texts, app usage, or location updates after that timestamp. At 5:52 p.m., Michael Mitchell contacted Emily's phone several times without result. By 6:43 p.m., after attempts to reach both Eleanor and Frank went unanswered, he drove to the Hayes home. Finding no response, he returned home and filed a missing person report with the Cedar Falls Police Department at 7:09 p.m. An initial wellness check was performed that evening at the Hayes residence. Frank Hayes answered the door and stated Emily had not come by. Eleanor Hayes was not present during the visit, reportedly out shopping. Officers noted no visible signs of forced entry, disorder, or distress at the scene. On June 3rd, both grandparents provided formal statements. Frank Hayes claimed he had spent most of the day in his upstairs study, unaware of any visitors. Eleanor Hayes stated she had been out of the house from 10:30 a.m. until approximately 4 p.m., shopping at the Cedar Valley Mall. Her credit card records and mall surveillance corroborated the alibi. Frank Hayes could not provide third-party confirmation for his whereabouts. Investigators began door-to-door interviews with neighbors on Larkspur Drive. 2 residents reported seeing a young woman matching Emily's description walking toward the house shortly before noon. No one witnessed her leaving. A canvass of surrounding properties yielded no additional footage of her exit or interaction with others. Given the family history, specifically the unsolved disappearance of Lauren Mitchell in 2003, investigators flagged the case as high sensitivity. On June 4th, a formal request was filed to re-examine the Lauren Mitchell cold case alongside the current investigation. Both cases were assigned to a joint task force under the jurisdiction of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. Digital forensic analysts recovered Emily's phone backup from cloud data and confirmed the final text to Michael Mitchell was authentic and timestamped. No unusual correspondence or threats were found in her messaging history. Bank statements revealed no transactions after the morning of June 2nd. Her vehicle was located undisturbed in the college parking lot, and no indications of struggle or forced entry were found. Emily's work supervisor at Ridgeview Books confirmed she had no shift scheduled that day and no disputes with coworkers. Media attention resurfaced immediately due to the connection to the 2003 case. On June 6th, the Cedar Falls Police Department issued a press release stating that Emily Mitchell had gone missing under unexplained but concerning circumstances. A $$25,000 reward for information was offered by a private donor. Public interest in the Mitchell family surged, and online speculation regarding the father, Michael, began to circulate. On June 7th, Michael Mitchell was brought in for questioning. He provided a consistent timeline, was cooperative with all investigative procedures, and permitted a forensic sweep of his home and vehicle. No irregularities were noted. He was not named a suspect. Law enforcement turned its attention back to the Hayes residence. No warrant was issued at that time. Investigators maintained discreet surveillance beginning June 8th. The investigation entered its second week with no physical evidence, no direct witnesses, and no digital trail. But attention was already beginning to shift toward the last known destination, the home on Larkspur Drive. On the morning of June 20th, 2023, Eleanor Hayes initiated a routine cleaning of the living room area of her home on Larkspur Drive. While moving a heavy oak cabinet to vacuum behind it, she discovered an item partially wedged between the cabinet's base and the wall. Upon retrieval, she identified the object as a black braided bracelet with a silver charm, later confirmed by Michael Mitchell to belong to Emily. Eleanor reported in her voluntary statement that she was shocked and confused, unable to account for how the bracelet came to be inside the home. let alone behind furniture in a room Emily had ostensibly never entered on June 2nd. The discovery prompted what Eleanor would later describe as a gut-level feeling that something was very wrong. On June 21st, she descended into the basement, a part of the home she rarely entered due to mobility concerns and what she described as her husband's preference to handle things down there. While inspecting an area near the back of the basement, behind 2 rows of stacked moving boxes and disused furniture, she located a light blue JanSport backpack. A name tag sewn into the inner lining read Emily Mitchell. The bag was zipped, and inside were several personal effects, a spiral notebook, a water bottle, and a library copy of The Bell Jar, checked out from Black Hawk Community College on May 17th. Eleanor immediately contacted the Cedar Falls Police Department. Officers arrived at 10:48 a.m. and secured the property. A search warrant was expedited and granted the same afternoon. Forensic investigators began cataloging the basement environment at 2:16 p.m. A preliminary luminol application revealed trace blood patterns on the concrete floor near a disused storage locker, measuring approximately 18 inches in diameter. DNA swabbing was conducted on site, and samples were sent to the Iowa State Crime Lab for expedited processing. During this phase, Eleanor was separated from Frank Hayes and relocated temporarily to a nearby hotel under protective supervision. Investigators noted that Frank appeared visibly perturbed upon their arrival and inquired multiple times whether the search was strictly necessary. According to field notes, he remained cooperative but agitated. He declined legal representation at that time. Forensic analysis of the basement further revealed scuff marks consistent with the dragging of a heavy object, extending from the rear wall toward the stairs. Investigators cataloged several items for removal and testing, including a rusted metal filing cabinet, 2 rolled area rugs, and a set of nylon cords with fraying ends. Detectives cross-referenced the library's checkout system and verified that Emily had signed out the book found in the backpack. Its presence in the basement conclusively contradicted Frank Hayes' prior statement that Emily never arrived. The discovery of the backpack and bracelet, both verifiably Emily's, prompted a formal declaration of the house as a potential crime scene. Media presence intensified by evening, and Cedar Falls PD issued a follow-up statement classifying Emily Mitchell's case as an active criminal investigation with evidence suggesting foul play. The blood samples would later be confirmed to match Emily Mitchell's DNA profile. The notebook contained several pages of handwritten text, including class notes, a grocery list, and a draft message to Grandma Eleanor, expressing interest in asking questions about her mother's disappearance. The page was undated. By June 23, a second warrant was filed to authorize continued excavation and search of the basement and surrounding property. Frank Hayes retained legal counsel on June 24 and refused further questioning. Investigators began examining prior family statements for discrepancies, now treating the home not just as the endpoint of Emily Mitchell's movements, but possibly that of her mother, Lauren, 2 decades earlier. On June 25, 2023, the Cedar Falls Police Department executed the second authorized search warrant on the Hayes residence at 7 a.m., accompanied by forensic technicians and evidence recovery specialists. The focus of the operation was the basement, which had now been reclassified as a suspected primary crime scene. A more exhaustive sweep commenced, involving thermal imaging, floor core sampling, and the disassembly of large fixtures and containers. Special attention was given to a rusted, double-drawer metal filing cabinet positioned in the far northwest corner of the basement, previously overlooked due to its unassuming placement and years of dust accumulation. During disassembly of the cabinet at approximately 9:47 a.m., investigators located a concealed false bottom in the lower drawer. Inside, wrapped in deteriorated plastic sheeting and secured with electrical tape, was a compact digital video camcorder, an older mini-DV model consistent with consumer electronics manufactured in the early 2000s. The device showed visible signs of corrosion but remained intact. Technicians transported it under chain of custody to the State Crime Lab for data extraction. Frank Hayes, who had remained on site during the initial hours of the search, was escorted from the premises at 10:15 a.m. at the request of officers, citing scene integrity concerns. He was not under arrest at this point but was informed that access to the home was now restricted pending the outcome of forensic review. Concurrent with the video discovery, evidence technicians continued basement excavation and uncovered additional trace evidence near the rear wall, including hair fibers entangled in old duct tape adhered to the wall's base molding. The fibers were consistent in color and length with those of both Lauren and Emily Mitchell and were bagged for mitochondrial DNA comparison. 2 of the removed area rugs, previously cataloged, were tested with luminol and showed high-contrast fluorescence along their inner folds. This indicated prior saturation of biological fluids. Carpet samples were removed for lab testing. On June 26, analysts successfully recovered data from the mini-DV camcorder, which included a single video file timestamped October 14, 2003, the date of Lauren Mitchell's disappearance. The video was 127 minutes in length and depicted graphic content involving Lauren Mitchell, apparently unconscious or deceased, positioned on the basement floor. At multiple points in the recording, Frank Hayes is visible in frame, engaging in acts later described in court documents as post-mortem sexual violation. The scene offered no signs of physical struggle, suggesting incapacitation prior to death. Upon confirmation of the video's contents, detectives presented the evidence to the Cedar Falls County District Attorney. A formal request was issued for a warrant to detain and interrogate Frank Hayes on suspicion of murder, sexual abuse, and concealment of a corpse. The warrant was approved at 4:22 p.m., and Hayes was taken into custody without incident at a local hardware store where he was purchasing gardening lime and hand tools, items later noted in the case file as potentially related to clandestine burial attempts. Under interview, Hayes invoked his right to legal counsel and declined to answer questions. He was remanded to Cedar Falls County Jail pending arraignment. Prosecutors requested a no-bail hold due to the severity of the charges and the risk of flight. Meanwhile, Eleanor Hayes, emotionally distressed and under protective supervision, was relocated to a secure residence outside of Cedar Falls. Law enforcement issued a press release stating that the investigation had reached a critical evidentiary threshold and that remains may be present on the property. A perimeter search of the backyard was scheduled for the following morning, with cadaver dogs and forensic excavation teams on standby. The case was no longer treated as a disappearance. It was now a double homicide investigation. On the morning of June 27, 2023, forensic excavation teams arrived at the Hayes residence under sealed order to begin systematic analysis of the backyard area. Cadaver dogs from the Iowa State Search and Rescue Unit alerted positively near the northwest perimeter of the property, approximately 12 feet behind the toolshed. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed irregular soil composition in a rectangular zone measuring approximately 6 by 3 feet, located beneath a discarded wooden compost frame. Excavation began at 8:14 a.m., overseen by both local law enforcement and a forensic anthropologist from the University of Iowa. At a depth of 42 centimeters, the first layer of decomposed cloth and plastic was uncovered. Beneath it, human remains in advanced skeletal decomposition were located, loosely wrapped in a faded blue tarp. Dental records, examined on-site by the forensic team, provided preliminary confirmation that the remains belonged to Lauren Mitchell, missing since October 2003. Positioned directly beneath the first body and separated by a thin layer of disturbed soil, a second set of remains was discovered at 10:02 a.m. The second body, in early-stage decomposition and partially clothed, was later confirmed through DNA testing to be that of Emily Mitchell. The position and condition of the remains strongly indicated separate burial events, separated by approximately 2 decades. Both victims had signs of binding at the wrists and soft tissue trauma around the mouth and neck areas, consistent with postmortem restraint or suppression. Soil samples surrounding the bodies tested positive for calcium hydroxide residue, suggesting an attempt to accelerate decomposition through chemical means, corroborating the items found in Frank Hayes' vehicle at the time of his arrest. At 12:45 p.m., investigators held a private briefing with Michael Mitchell, who had been placed under temporary protective monitoring due to public speculation. He was informed of the discovery and identification of both his wife and daughter. According to detectives' notes, he showed extreme emotional distress and required medical attention shortly after receiving the news. The video retrieved from the camcorder, already analyzed and authenticated by digital forensic specialists, was submitted into sealed court evidence. Prosecutors noted that its content constituted direct visual documentation of a criminal act and physical presence at the scene, effectively placing Frank Hayes with the victim's body within hours of her disappearance in 2003. No such footage was found depicting the death of Emily Mitchell, but the forensic timeline, physical evidence, and concealment method mirrored those of her mother, allowing prosecutors to establish a pattern of behavior. On June 29, a public statement from the Cedar Falls District Attorney's Office confirmed that 2 sets of human remains had been located and positively identified. The Hayes residence was reclassified as a full crime scene and condemned under municipal order. All remaining residents were barred from entering. Eleanor Hayes, through a sworn affidavit, disavowed knowledge of the crimes and offered full cooperation. Her fingerprints were not found on any of the recovered concealment materials. The community reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the state broadcast the developments, and public gatherings formed near the police perimeter. The Mitchell case, once a local cold case footnote, now dominated national headlines. On June 30th, Frank Hayes was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. By July 2nd, Hayes' defense counsel filed a motion to suppress the camcorder footage, citing unlawful search. The motion was denied on the grounds of exigent circumstance and valid search warrant. The stage was now set for the pretrial hearing, one that would revisit 2 decades of unanswered questions and bring long-suppressed truths into full legal and public light. On July 5, 2023, Frank Hayes was transferred from Cedar Falls County Jail to a secured interview room at the Iowa State Criminal Investigation Division following the formal denial of his counsel's motion to suppress key forensic evidence. Detectives James Holbrook and Carlin Gwynn conducted the interview, which began at 9:12 a.m. and lasted 2 hours and 38 minutes. The session was video recorded in full. At the outset, Hayes was read his Miranda rights and signed a waiver consenting to interrogation without legal representation present. The waiver was later confirmed as valid by the district attorney's office. Following a 21-minute period of silence, Hayes initiated verbal acknowledgement of the charges. When presented with still images from the camcorder footage, he remained unresponsive. It was only after investigators stated that DNA results had definitively linked blood traces in the basement to both Lauren and Emily Mitchell that Hayes began to speak. According to the official transcript, his opening words were, "I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would take this long." Hayes then proceeded to deliver a full confession, stating that on the morning of October 14, 2003, Lauren Mitchell arrived at the Hayes residence unannounced, visibly agitated and requesting to speak privately about a family matter. Eleanor was at work. Frank admitted to luring Lauren into the basement under the pretense of retrieving an old photo album she had asked about. Once downstairs, he claimed she became confrontational regarding past behavior and childhood boundaries. When she threatened to disclose previous incidents to her mother, he claimed he lost control. In his statement, Hayes detailed that Lauren struck her head during the confrontation, rendering her unconscious. He did not call emergency services. Instead, he admitted to waiting for over an hour before deciding to stage the basement, retrieve a camcorder from storage, and record what followed, actions he described as not planned, but inevitable. He confirmed that Lauren never regained consciousness and that she was buried the same evening in the backyard beneath the compost bed. Hayes further confessed that on June 2, 2023, Emily Mitchell came to the house alone, asking questions about her mother's disappearance and expressing interest in searching through family belongings. Eleanor had left for a grocery errand. Frank invited Emily in and offered her tea. Within 30 minutes, he guided her to the basement, claiming he had something to show her. He admitted to incapacitating her with a blow to the head from behind as she descended the stairs. The confession notes that he repeated the concealment process almost identically, binding, wrapping, and burying her body next to Lauren's in the same location. Throughout the statement, Hayes displayed what investigators later described in their report as calculated calmness, interrupted only by short bouts of visible shaking. At no point did he express remorse. When asked why he had kept the camcorder or why he had never destroyed the physical evidence, he reportedly replied, "Some part of me wanted someone to find out. Not her. Just someone." The confession was audio and video recorded and signed by Hayes and both attending detectives. The district attorney's office confirmed its admissibility during a press briefing held later that afternoon. The charges against Hayes were updated to include 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, 2 counts of necrophilia, and aggravated abuse of a corpse. Public response to the confession was immediate and severe. Multiple candlelight vigils were held outside the Mitchell family home and Cedar Falls courthouse. Michael Mitchell, through his legal counsel, issued a brief statement. "For 20 years I lived with unanswered questions. Today I have answers. But no peace." Preparations began for a high-profile trial. Prosecutors stated they would pursue a full conviction without the possibility of parole and declined to offer any plea agreement. Frank Hayes was returned to solitary confinement pending further psychological evaluation and pretrial motions. The case, now nationally known as the Cedar Falls double burial, would proceed to jury selection in the coming weeks. On August 14, 2023, the state of Iowa versus Frank Hayes entered its sentencing phase following his unexpected guilty plea submitted during a pretrial hearing held 2 days earlier. Prosecutors confirmed that Hayes had waived his right to trial by jury and entered a plea of guilty on all charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. The plea agreement stipulated no possibility of parole and no appeal, as per the state's maximum sentencing guidelines. The courtroom proceedings were held under heightened security due to the case's public notoriety and the emotional volatility expressed by extended family members and local residents. During the sentencing hearing, the presiding judge, Honorable Margaret Leland, addressed the courtroom before delivering her final ruling. She stated for the record, "This court finds the acts committed by the defendant to be of the highest moral and legal depravity. His admission of guilt spares the victims' families a prolonged trial, but it does not mitigate the cruelty or the years of deception. The defendant shall serve 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be carried out at Iowa State Penitentiary." Hayes, seated motionless in a gray prison jumpsuit, declined the opportunity to make a personal statement. Immediately following the sentence, Eleanor Hayes was placed under temporary psychiatric supervision. According to medical intake reports later made public through a Freedom of Information Act request, she displayed significant symptoms of acute stress reaction, including dissociation and compulsive self-blame. In her sworn affidavit filed with the district attorney's office, Eleanor reiterated that she had no prior knowledge of either crime and provided detailed timelines of her comings and goings on both critical dates. Investigators found no evidence implicating her in any part of the concealment or aftermath. She later relocated to a private residence out of state under a new identity. Those close to Eleanor noted a visible decline in her mental health during the weeks following Frank Hayes' arrest. She reportedly experienced recurring insomnia, panic attacks, and episodes of confusion. In a brief statement made during a psychological evaluation, Eleanor said, "I thought I knew the man I married. I cannot understand how someone lives beside you for decades, hides something so horrific, and you never see it." Her emotional isolation deepened as community members distanced themselves, and her home became the symbol of the town's deepest betrayal. Michael Mitchell held a closed-casket funeral service for Lauren and Emily on September 3, 2023, attended by over 150 people, including former colleagues, neighbors, and law enforcement officials who had worked the original case. The remains, confirmed through DNA testing and dental analysis, were laid to rest side by side at Willow Creek Cemetery in Cedar Falls. The service was private, and media presence was restricted by court order. A brief eulogy was delivered by Reverend Alan Marks, who had presided over the couple's wedding ceremony 2 decades earlier. Subsequent investigative reports revealed additional disturbing details about Frank Hayes' past. A sealed juvenile court record, later unsealed following a court petition by the prosecution, showed that Hayes had been accused of inappropriate behavior toward a foster sibling at the age of 16. Though the case had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence and the record expunged at age 18, it resurfaced as a key point of public discussion. Former co-workers at a local hardware store where Hayes had worked in the 1990s described him as socially isolated, with one employee anonymously stating, "He made people uncomfortable, especially around younger women." Authorities also reviewed a 2001 domestic disturbance call made from the Hayes residence, in which Eleanor had reported her husband acting paranoid and erratic. No charges were filed, and Eleanor later declined to cooperate further. The pattern of overlooked or minimized incidents became the focus of investigative journalism in the weeks after the sentencing. The city of Cedar Falls proceeded with the official condemnation of the Hayes residence on September 15, 2023. A demolition crew removed the structure under the supervision of the local health department. Forensic soil testing was conducted at the burial site, and biohazard remediation was completed. In a resolution passed unanimously by the City Council, a small memorial garden was approved for development at the location. The proposed plaque would read, "In silence they waited. In justice they were found." The Mitchell case prompted regional discussion about missed warning signs and systemic oversights. Advocacy groups pushed for mandatory psychological evaluations in domestic homicide cases involving step-parents, and several states reviewed outdated limitations on reopening sealed juvenile records when connected to violent felonies. In Cedar Falls, the story remained a somber reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight and how silence, for years, allowed it to remain undisturbed.